This is Boston Lanka News, bringing you news, views and entertainment from Boston and USA. I'm Vayoni Dimel. For the special edition on UNHRC Sessions in Geneva, we join with Dr. Dayan Jayatilleka, who is a political scientist, author and who served Sri Lanka as a diplomat. In responding to UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Namai Pillai's report, Sri Lanka government have issued a strong statement saying that Mrs. Pillai's call for an independent international investigation reflects the preconceived, politicized and prejudicial agenda which she has relentlessly pursued with regard to Sri Lanka. Now, this is not only a highly critical statement, but it also questions the integrity of Commissioner Pillai. What do you think about this strategy the government is following?
Well, if you go to YouTube and click on the videos of the special session of the UNHRC in May 2009, you will find that the session opened with a video message from High Commissioner Namai Pillai, beamed from New York City to Geneva, calling on the Council to adopt an international inquiry into war crimes allegedly committed by both sides. She said this in 2009. Sri Lanka was able at that time to convince the vast majority of the Council's members, that's 62% of the Council's members, to reject that call. So today, Sri Lanka is sounding different from the way in which we did in 2009. We were able to persuade. We were able to argue logically and rationally. We were able to convince. Our narrative was more convincing than that of our critics and opponents. But today, Sri Lanka is merely sounding shrill. It is attacking Namai Pillai's motivations. I mean, we don't have to attack anyone's motivations. We don't know what their motivations are. The important thing is to convince the majority of the Council. And I must emphasize that the UN Human Rights Council is structurally constituted in a manner that the majority of votes come not from the Western nations or Eastern European allies of the West, but precisely from the three regions of Asia Pacific, Africa, and Latin America. 34 votes out of 47 come from these three regions. In other words, 72% of the Council come from regions which are or were our friends. Now, if we are unable to convince such a Council of our position, our ideas, our narrative, then there is something very wrong with what we are saying and doing, or not saying and not doing. I think that this is not the way we should respond to Namai Pillai's report. Namai Pillai's report contains one suggestion or slogan that is completely out of order, which is outrageous. That is the slogan of an international inquiry into so-called war crimes. But if you take the rest of the report, she's been very intelligent about it. The call for an international inquiry into war crimes allegations rests on a scaffolding, as it were, an entire structure of argumentation. She says that Sri Lanka has not done A, B, C, D, that her office offered help on these issues, that it is because Sri Lanka has not displayed the political will to have an international inquiry or to move on any of these issues, that there is no choice but to have an international independent inquiry, because we have not had a national inquiry. Now, we have to be able to sift out, separate out the wheat from the chaff, right from wrong, reasonable from unreasonable, the moderate criticisms and constructive criticisms she makes from the extreme and unfair criticism she makes and the demands she's making on us. Some of the things she says are in the ballpark. Now we have to recognize that. The best way to combat the most dangerous thing she's trying to do, which is to foist an international inquiry on Sri Lanka through the Council, is to engage with and to neutralize the rest of what she's saying. And the rest of what she's saying isn't all that far off in terms of criticisms and suggestions. So we should remove the props on which her case for an international inquiry rests. And the way to remove those props is to make progress and to pledge credibly that we shall make progress with a timetable, within a timetable, on those other issues. And this is what the Sri Lankan Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission's report has called for. If we have a timetable to implement those recommendations, and if we call on or accept the office of the High Commissioner's offer of technical assistance, then we can go before the Council and say, look, before the September session, we are going to do all this. And we are going to accept the High Commissioner's offer of technical assistance. But we simply cannot accept this intrusive, invasive imposition of an international inquiry, which no country in a similar situation has gone through. So we have to be able to segment out that which is relatively fair and reasonable, and isolate that demand she's making, which is unreasonable and dangerous. There are many things that she's saying in her report which are good for Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka would be a better place if we implemented those. Not the international inquiry, but pretty much the rest of what she's saying. So we have to be reasonable enough to recognize that fact, and it is only if we do so that we will be able to win the middle ground in the Council and thereby deflect this dangerous attempt to have a so-called independent international inquiry into the Sri Lankan war. And I'm not preaching something now that I did not practice in 2009 in Geneva when we won, because again, if you go back to YouTube and you click on the speech I made before the vote, I pointed out that Sri Lanka's preemptive counter-resolution, the one that we presented with our allies, the non-aligned movement and the BRICS, actually takes over and contains a large number of paragraphs from the draft resolution that the European Union, supported by the United States, was moving against Sri Lanka. We took all the paragraphs that were positive and helpful and constructive and moderate, which they might have intended as the sugar coating of the pill, but we took the sugar coating and we put it in our winning resolution. So that is the strategy that worked for us in 2009. We didn't reject everything that everyone said. In fact, we didn't reject everything that even our critics, and at that moment our adversaries of the West, said. We took that which was good for the country and we rejected that which was bad. That is the approach that we should adopt, but that is not the approach the Sri Lankan government has chosen to adopt in 2012, 13, and now 2014. The current attitude, which of course, as I said, is probably a reflection of the parameters imposed by the defense bureaucracy. The current policies of saying no to everything is rejecting every criticism, every suggestion, however fair or constructive, and therefore losing the moral high ground, losing votes. We sound so self-righteous that we can't convince anyone. the way to do it is not to sound self-righteous. It's like a trial. The Human Rights Council is the jury. We must at least be able to introduce reasonable doubt into the minds of the jury so that this verdict of an international inquiry can be taken off the table. Now, reasonable doubt means that you have to accept that certain things went wrong. There was a tragedy in human terms in some aspects of what happened, and we shall address those. Now, we haven't done that. It's outright rejectionism that we are adopting, and this verges on neo-isolationism. For an American audience or Sri Lankan American audience, I must say that we are sounding not like the Obama administration. We are sounding like the George W. Bush administration. This is Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld rhetoric that is coming out of the Sri Lankan administration. We just caught in a kind of a time warp. I mean, this is no longer Bush's world. It's not even Bush's America. And we shouldn't be sounding this way. We are like 10 years out of sync with the world. But that's the way we are sounding, and we are going into that council, and we are going to sound this way, and we are not going to be able to convince more than a handful of friends.
Don't you think Sri Lankan government is putting themselves in a trap by trying to please Sri Lankan electorate and win a local election in one hand, and then address some issues with an international audience and win the world opinion?
Well, I mean, it's a trap that we don't have to get into because, I mean, the government isn't facing a formidable opposition. It's facing Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe. I mean, the government is going to win any election in which Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe is the leader of the other side. So I don't see why they should get themselves caught in a trap between domestic electoral compulsions and Geneva electoral compulsions when there's only one real battle, and that is the Geneva battle. The other one is a cakewalk, so long as Ranil is leading the opposition. That's not a problem there. The real trap that Sri Lanka has got into is a much more serious one. Almost for the first time, Sri Lanka is caught on two fronts. One is the Western Front, with Geneva as the main arena. But we are facing an offensive led by the United Kingdom and the United States. And I put it in that order, UK, US, rather than US, UK. And then we have another possibly more serious front, and that is Tamil Nadu, because now Jayalalitha Jairam has taken the unprecedented step of including in the election manifesto of her party, the AIADMK, a slogan that a referendum should be held under UN auspices among the Tamils in Sri Lanka and Sri Lankan Tamils the world over on the issue of a separate Tamil leader. Now, this is very serious because Jayalalitha is tipped as a possible prime ministerial compromise candidate if Mr. Modi doesn't get the requisite number of seats in parliament, and even if she doesn't become prime minister, which I don't think is going to happen, she will have a very strong bargaining position with the BJP. Part of that bargain would be a hardening of policy on Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka is caught on two fronts. These two fronts are linked, not only because of the overarching strategic relationship between the United States and India, but because, as we remember, before India voted against Sri Lanka for the first time in 2012, the then Secretary of State of the United States, Hillary Clinton, visited Chennai on her trip to India and had a discussion with Jayalalitha Jairam. So the connections are very clear. It's after that that Jayalalitha went on the warpath, as it were, and Delhi had to shift its position and vote against Sri Lanka at the UNHRC. This was 2012. So we are facing an encirclement. It's a worse situation than young Prince Dudugamunu faced, because he felt himself trapped between the sea at his back and a Tamil kingdom on Sri Lanka soil, uh, which had been set up as a result of an earlier incursion from South India. But we will always have the Indian Ocean at our back, and we are being hemmed in on two interlinked fronts. This is a very serious trap to be caught in. It's a trap that we need not have been caught in at all. I often say, can you imagine if everything else were the same, everything, with the exception that Lakshman Kadirgamma were alive and Mahinda Rajapaksa is foreign minister today, we wouldn't be having this conversation in this manner. But we don't have him as our foreign minister. He's not around, and we don't have an equivalent. And therefore, we are facing a very serious squeeze, which is going to get much worse. The end game will perhaps start in 2016 if Hillary Clinton becomes the president of the United States, which is quite likely. So it's a triangle we are caught in on the Western front, the Indian and especially the South Indian front, and as I said, we don't have strategic space. Our backs are to the sea. This is the situation that our policy makers and policy planners should be thinking about, but I don't think that they're thinking about any such thing.
If even at this late stage, if you get a chance or invited to offer strategic advice to President Rajapaksa, what would you say to him?
Oh, that's very easy. I've been saying it publicly. I don't know whether he's read it or heard it or seen it on television, but I'll say it again. I have 4 very simple steps, all of which can be taken by tomorrow morning. Really. I'm serious. One is that President Rajapaksa appoints an independent domestic inquiry as recommended by the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission to investigate certain specific acts or events that took place at the tail end of the war. And this commission should be headed by an internationally renowned Sri Lankan such as Justice C.G. Veeramantri, who was the Vice President of the World Court, or Sir Desmond de Silva, Queen's Counsel, who was a Chief Prosecutor in the International Criminal Court at The Hague. So that's step one. Imagine, tomorrow morning you wake up. Sri Lanka has a commission of inquiry with C.G. Veeramantri heading it, or Sir Desmond de Silva heading it. What are the Americans going to do? Bring a resolution? Say it's not good enough? This is the former Vice President of the World Court. Is Navi Pillai going to say, I don't trust C.G. Veeramantri? No. It'll go away. And if the Americans try to move a resolution against us, they're not going to get a vote. If we do this, we are now a sitting duck. We have to be a moving target. We have to change our target profile. The second suggestion I would make to the President is use the good offices of the South Africans in starting or restarting the process of political dialogue with the TNA and the Northern Provincial Council. Right now, there is no political process. There's nothing. Occasionally they meet. There is no ongoing dialogue. That dialogue is not going to take place in the Parliamentary Select Committee. I mean, who's going there? Nobody's going there. It has to be chaired by the President himself. And it has to be with Sambandhan and Vigneshwar. If it cannot be done alone, the South Africans have appointed a top politician, Cyril Ramaphosa, a legend in Africa, as their special envoy on peace and reconciliation in Sri Lanka. Talk to them. Get them to set it up. Have this process. And then you can announce it in Geneva. The process of political dialogue should be for the purpose of drawing up a roadmap for the full, if graduated, implementation of the 13th Amendment. And if there are certain things that Colombo doesn't want to grant the Council, then there have to be mutually agreed upon trade-offs, swaps. And that can come only by looking at the concurrent list, that's the list where both Colombo and the province share and reshuffling those powers. That can be done. That's point 2. Point 3 is that we should appoint 2 committees, one on the possible effects of economic sanctions, and that should have the top economists in the country, Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy, Dr. Saman Kalaigama, Dr. Lloyd Fernando, Professor Nimal Sandaratna, Dr. Dushim Vihirko. And there should be another team looking at the international legal ramifications, headed by Dr. Rohan Pereira, who was the chairman of the UN Ad hoc Committee on Terrorism in New York and a member of the International Law Council. So we should have these 2 committees studying the possible implications of moves against Sri Lanka. And the 4th and final point I would make is talk to the Russians and the Chinese. Don't ask them for votes. They're going to vote for us anyway, and they must be talking to people and trying to get us votes. That's not it. Learn from what happened with Iran and Syria. The Americans were about to hit the Syrians, and they might have hit the Iranians. Certainly the Israelis wanted them to. But now they're talking. How did this happen? Because Russia, quietly supported by China, made a diplomatic intervention and came up with a creative proposal which brought both sides to the negotiating table. So ask our friends, the Russians, the Chinese, and other powerful, pivotal states like the Indonesians to not move a counter resolution. I mean, that's crazy. But to take a diplomatic initiative based on the reform measures that we are willing to take. And to move in the council and say, look, this is a dangerous polarization. It's a dangerous precedent. The Sri Lankans have promised to do this. We stand guarantee for them. And let's have some kind of an intermediate settlement or solution. Take the international inquiry off the table, and we will get the Sri Lankans to do all the other things that Nabi Pillay has listed, or the West is concerned about, which is really to do with the domestic human rights situation and an independent accountability hearing into the last stages of the war. Now, this can be done, but that means we have to be ready for trade-offs. We have to be ready to be flexible. We must be willing to give something to somebody. We shouldn't give the most dangerous thing, that is agreement on an international inquiry. But short of that, we should be willing to talk and to trade and compromise and be flexible. We have to shrink our target profile. We have to be flexible, and we have to be a moving target. Right now, we think that we are taking a very strong principled stand, but we are a cross between a sitting duck and an ostrich with its head buried in the sand. That's not the right way to be with Sri Lanka in the world.
That concludes our news edition. We meet you again with another news edition of News, Views and Entertainment from Boston and USA. Till then, goodbye.